welcome to another episode of Bridge the Channel. We're coming to you again from Westminster, although, spoiler alert, we're not going to be talking all that much about British politics in this episode, finally, but how could we resist the amazing fog behind us? Probably the most amazing moment we have captured in our video. So let us just take all our artistic feelings and all our artistic juices flowing with this very nice autumn morning in London. We're actually going to be talking more about the US in this episode. We have the midterm elections, which matter, of course, a lot for the US, but they also matter for the rest of the world. And we may actually have some news and some developments regarding Brexit and Northern Ireland, which of course is related to developments in the United States as well. So welcome to this impressionistic episode of Bridge the Channel. Let's go see what we have for you in this episode. So we start with the midterm elections in the United States, which of course matter more for the US, particularly how American voters don't really vote in those things, thinking about foreign policy, but of course the results always have an impact on American foreign policy and by extension the rest of the world. The results are in by now, you've probably heard them. Actually, just a day before we recorded this, it became final that the Democrats will, after all, hold the Senate. It looks like the Republicans are going to win the House of Representatives. Definitely a very underwhelming result for the Republican Party, and even more underwhelming result for ex-President Trump, who was hoping to make a red wave in these midterm elections, a springboard for his re-election campaign. It seems that most people here in London, and I think the rest of Europe, are a bit relieved with the result. There were many questions about US policy and US foreign policy if there had been a Republican red wave. I think one of the main winners of this election is Ukraine, and the reason is that there was this fear that if the Republicans won, and if especially the Trump win of the Republican Party did well, that would have been an indirect referendum on the way that Joe Biden has handled the Ukraine crisis and all the implications with inflation, energy prices, and so on. So I think Ukraine breathes a sigh of relief. I think there's relief in the EU and the UK as well, although I'm in the camp that is always a bit cautious about quite simplistic ideas about the Democratic Party being kind of the good guy in all of this and the Republican Party being the bad guy. I think we need to be quite sanguine about the fact that both the Democratic and the Republican Party have moved quite far away from what used to be the Atlanticist liberal consensus of the 1990s and the 2000s. The Democrats, as much as the Republicans, want to protect the economy. They have protectionist inclinations. We saw that with some legislation that Joe Biden put forward a few weeks before the midterm elections. Both of them are quite focused on China, and we have to see the degree and the amount of patience they still have with Ukraine and all the economic implications that this has. Of course, the main takeaway from the elections is that with the Republicans potentially controlling one of the two houses in Washington, D.C., we will see much more deadlock, much more polarization continuing in the United States. And with what's going on in the Republican Party, we should see whether we're going to get someone else than Donald Trump leading the Republican Party into the presidential election. We shouldn't expect, again, someone very internationalist to lead the Republican Party. This is not where the Republican is currently, and we have to ask ourselves whether getting rid of Trump is good, but actually getting someone who is Trumpian but also quite competent might actually be worse in the long term. Anyway, there's a lot of speculation. I think we will see much more continuity with US foreign policy than what we expected before the results of the midterms were in, and I think for the time being, political elites in London and the EU will be more than happy to live with this result. Of course, it wouldn't be a Bridge the Channel episode coming to you from Westminster without a bit of Brexit news. And I would say that even in this respect here, we actually don't have all that bad news to report after all. There seems to be a bit of positive movement there. Rishi Sunak has met the Irish Prime Minister. There's a lot of positive noises coming out of London, Dublin, also the EU. And I would think that also the result of the midterm elections in the US, which have unexpectedly probably strengthened or at least not significantly weakened President Biden, is also good news for for that, given, of course, how much invested Joe Biden is in the positive resolution of the Northern Ireland problem. A lot of people are expecting a lot of movement in the coming months, not least because there's the April deadline. Next April is going to be the 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement that ended the Northern Ireland troubles, and it would be an amazing landmark for Biden, but also for Sunak, to have this problem resolved. There is still legislation on the Northern Ireland Protocol going through the Houses of Parliament. I think that the legislation will stay there so that the UK has a card in its hands to play, but until now what we can say is that we don't really see Sunak playing the big Brexit warrior, Northern Ireland warrior shtick like Boris Johnson and Liz Truss did. This is not really his kind of gig, if you will. And I think given his relative lack of diplomatic credentials and diplomatic gravitas, he would like to have a diplomatic success to celebrate coming forward. So if we take into account the results of the midterms and also this positive movement here, there seems to be overall a constellation of factors that leads to a bit more stability in transatlantic, Euro-Atlantic and UK-EU relations. Who would have thought things might actually be looking up? So that was another episode of Bridge the Channel, the most Londony episode we have recorded probably. It's a great advertisement for the London tourism industry right behind me, very cinematic. I think this adds to a general sense of things kind of looking okay in this episode for a change. We're headed towards the holiday season and the end of the year, probably with things looking better than what they did just a few weeks or a few months ago. Of course, we're going to have to wait and see what's going to happen in loads of other fronts, in Brexit, in Ukraine, in US politics. And Bridge the Channel and the Martin Center is, of course, going to be here to give you all the rundown in all of this. Until next time, take care.